All right, back for another episode. Today, I thought we would branch off a conversation I had this week. It was actually with someone who runs a youth baseball program, and he was talking about sort of some pull he had from parents of starting softball programs. I think a couple interesting points of the conversation was that the age group he mostly works with is like four, which is really a big asterisk, four to 12. And there has been pushback, and this is not where we're probably going to go with this conversation, but of just having like co-ed programs and some desire to have like a separate softball program. And so him and I talked a lot about a lot of things. And so maybe a separate conversation of like why we might feel the need to separate them at four. Probably not, but that's a different conversation, different day. But we were talking a little bit about sort of like what is actually different about baseball, softball. Why would you need to start pulling athletes out to be able to prepare for softball? His daughter is very young. I think he said 6 or 7, and she's playing t-ball, just baseball, and she's, getting good. The ball is actually her size at that age with baseball, which is an interesting point. So she can really learn overhand. And it took us into a conversation really that got around pitching because the big differentiator at that age, when you're just talking about the scales, like get out of the idea of the ball is different and some of the rules are different and all of those things, but the actual skills you're trying to learn to keep getting better at softball, the actual only skills that are different is underhand pitching. So we talked a little bit about the difficulties of that. And I think it was just an interesting conversation because it got into things like pitch counts and why that may or may not be something that is possible in softball, how we might teach more people underhand to prep, the conversations we're having all the way at the collegiate level of like, okay, now we get to this place and we don't have enough pitchers. Like, what the heck are we supposed to do now? I had an interesting sort of like thought that in my son's baseball league, there's a girl that still plays 9U baseball, and she's legitimately, if not the best athlete in the whole league, like top 5. But she doesn't know how to underhand throw. And so if she did make the transition to softball at some point, you have now arguably probably what will be one of the better athletes that goes into the softball space who doesn't know how to pitch, which is much different than when you're looking at baseball. A lot of times it's sort of like inverse at the younger ages, that the best athletes are also the best pitchers. So anyways, that was sort of the conversation. So maybe first, Ashley, I'm going to kick it to you. We have talked about pitch counts before because people have asked us like our thoughts on pitch counts. Maybe just some thoughts on and bridging into kind of pitcher development of like why pitch counts are good or a bad idea, like what some of the difficulties that we sort of foresee would happen if we tried to do pitch counts and that conversation.
I mean, pitch counts would be great. It's a really good place to start. I mean, I think that's reality. Any negatives against pitch counts are that it's just not enough. You don't just say, oh, here's the pitch counts and then that's enough. One, are people following it? One, I just wrote something about this in our OGX community yesterday, where we were having athletes come on like Monday, Tuesdays. This happened like maybe 3 years ago, and they're like, "Oh, I'm so sore," and we're like, "Okay, I'm just going to assume you threw." We tally up your pitches from the weekend, and it's 3,432 pitches from the weekend, and they're like, "Actually, no, I didn't. There's 5 pitchers on my team. There's 4 pitchers on my team. I actually didn't throw that much." And then we started getting into like, oh, because it's travel ball and there's 8 games a day, they warmed up before everyone, and before everyone they threw 79 pitches, so it's just like, wow. So there's this world in pitch count is like, does it get followed? Like who's regulating that? And then also it only counts for the pitches you legitimately throw in the game. So we know that it's not enough, but it's a freaking place to start. I mean, we don't have anything. So we have pitchers that come, out of games and are like, oh, I tallied up my pitches and I threw 600 pitches today, like it's like wild. Or it's a winter and I threw, it was literally a January winter tournament. I have not pitched in a game in months, and I tallied my pitches and it was 342. It's just wild. So, I mean, I definitely think it would be great, because the reality is because so few people can pitch when they're younger. This is how these two conversations come together. Because so few people can pitch and can pitch in a way that produces something decent, because it's a really hard skill. It is the most physically complicated movement in the game. The task itself, I get it. When we joked around about what's harder, hitting or pitching, you're talking about which task is harder, but the movement complexity of it. So very few young kids with underdeveloped bodies can actually do such a physically complicated movement. So there's a small pool of people who can do it. And so you just throw them a shit ton. And so what we realized was happening, because way back in the day when we got our hands on some wearable sensors and some buff light data, some tech, we're like, let's measure this stuff for everybody, regardless of the age. And we're like, wow, like they're all exactly the same. Basically, their bodies cannot do it appropriately. So they don't actually produce anything on buff light. So what we realize is, to get the job done, they start just lowering their ceiling. They start getting stuck in these patterns that are the best they can do for now, but they start getting stuck in them, which really lowers their ceiling when they're older. They don't actually produce anything on the ball because those patterns actually aren't very good. Their hands are too small. It's like, so they just kind of get stuck in this world of, oh, I was good when I was 11 and 12, but I kind of stayed that good throughout. It's really difficult to be able to grow out of that. So, that's why pitch counts would be really a great place to start, because it's like, you can't have 3 pitchers. You can't have 2. High school, you can't freaking have 1, because there's legitimately going to be a rule that says at pitch count X, someone else has to throw. So you're going to have no other choice but to then start, developing and start teaching probably double the amount of athletes, at least, if not triple the amount of athletes. In a world where we're designing things that are a little bit more ideal, we might say just teach everyone on the team to be able to do it and then start to decide. But this way you would be forced to grow the number of pitchers. And that in and of itself, it's not only really great for the game, but it actually is more likely to feed better pitchers in the long run, because now those pitchers who were good early on, those pitchers probably are the pitchers that are going to be good later in life, except they get stuck. Maybe it's injury, but they get stuck in these patterns and stuck in these ways that are very difficult to undo just 3, 4, 5 years down the line. So that's really the issue at hand. And it's like, I always think, who's the guy, and that's not nice, but I'm going to assume it's a guy. Who's the guy that came up with the phrase, it's a natural motion? Like, I hate that guy. Like, who did that to us?
Yeah.
Because
I had a conversation with a parent this week. And I said something about, unfortunately, a lot of our conversations with pitchers are around pain. And she was like, not as bad as baseball, though. I'm like, not true. That's made up. You just aren't hearing UCL conversations. It's literally the difference is that, yes, the softball injuries, for the most part, outside of ACL and things like that, aren't things that take you out for 2 years, a year and a half. Like, yes, it's not. So
I
from that standpoint,
to a college game. I think it was last year. It was not this last season that just passed, but the season before that. And the announcers was like, well, because it's a natural motion. And I like
can't
gave like a gasp like that. And I was like, stop repeating shit that sabotages yourself. Like,
absolutely.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I was just like, if you ever say that in an announcement, I want you to know that is one of the most harmful things that you could ever say to an audience of parents, coaches, and young softball players. Never say that. Never say that. Yeah. It is not true. And you're just repeating shit that's not true.
Yeah. I think the pitch count thing is interesting because it's like, duh, like that would be an easy start. Except one of the things I said to the person I was talking to was, if you said, okay, starting next season at every level, this would never happen, but all the governing bodies agree to put in the same pitch counts. Like, it would be catastrophic for softball right now. And so I think the reality is it's not the same as baseball. So the implementation of pitch counts we'd
run out of people, right? Like,
absolutely. The teams would all fold. Like, there's just no chance there are enough pitchers for that. So I think, or they'd have to forfeit after day one, or, they just, no one would follow it. I think in reality, no one would follow it because it just
broken in that way.
And so I think the implementation of it would have to be over the course of a few years, and starting kind of at the younger ages where, okay, starting next season, the 10U has these pitch counts. The year after that, 12U has the pitch counts. It's like the slow progression of we're going to build it up. And so it puts the pressure on the younger ages to do that. The problem also, though, is is that when you do that, and really what I was talking to this guy about was, what is the program then we would implement as dads who have no idea how to teach underhand pitching? If it becomes our responsibility at this 8U, 10U age group to teach the whole team to pitch, how do we do that? They might do it in a way that's not great overhand, but generally everyone can go out there and play overhand catch with people and generally get the ideas of like a couple things they might say to a baseball pitcher that will help them generally. It might be wrong, but they have a sense of something. And in softball, it's just like, for the most part, the coaches have no sense of like, I couldn't even do that. So like, I can't demonstrate it. I can't, nothing like. And so I think it becomes so important that we think through some of these younger age, something like a plyo program, which is what we talked about, something that's very easily adoptable for those teams to just say like, this is part of your practice. You warm up by playing underhand catch. You warm up with this, plyo program. Everyone does it. So you start to teach it. It's so layered because even then when you implement something like that, then it's like,
it's so layered.
My son plays baseball in Little League, which I've talked about before. It's rec. They don't practice. It's not part of the structure of anything. They just play games. He had one practice with his team at 9U rec. And so, yes, all of the kids got opportunities to pitch, but like, unless you then took your 9-year-old to pitching instruction, or you had time to really go constantly in the backyard and do things. And what's so interesting about, and I think it was like the solo one that I recorded a while ago where I just like talked about you thing. But what's so interesting is like, oh, obviously just go have time to play catch with your kid in the backyard. That's what you do. Except even my son, who's in nothing, has something on Monday and something on Tuesday and something on Wednesday and homework on Thursday. And it's like, we don't have time to just go play catch that easily in the backyard to make sure he can know how to pitch. And so,
Krista, I think another layer you're missing here is like, we wrote this shit like 3-4 years ago because we were like, okay, once we realized we were idiots and collected biomechanics data on 10-year-olds, and it was like, like basically the software all spit out the same thing, like unstable as hell. Like that's the outputs,
Yeah. So all idiots have to start somewhere.
All idiots have to start somewhere. That's great. Way to go, guys. So anyway, once we got out of that phase of collecting data to show that like, this is not what we should be doing. Then we were like, oh, well then let's design these programs. Josh and I, it was like when he first started, we had our hands in this together, but we wrote this together. Here is a like intro to pitching. When someone calls and they're not ready, they're not at the age where what we do is appropriate for them, let's tell them to start with a plan like this on their own. And then we're like, you know what? We'll also offer it inside of OGX and teach it sometimes on the weekends. People hated that. You know who loved it? Josh's daughter. Josh is one of our own pitching coach. Josh's daughter had never thrown a softball pitching wise in her life. The first day she went to do that program, the ball went like behind her. Everyone was ducking. It was out of control. That kid, it's like a couple years later, she just smokes it now. Now she's still young, so who knows? But he knew that like education behind it. But the reality was for the parents, it wasn't sexy enough.
Yeah. They were like, it has to be in a team setting.
Yeah,
it has to be in a team setting.
I could also, but they all wanted to go to the lesson. And I don't judge because it's all they know. But they were like, yeah, but you're never teaching her a curve, and you're never teaching her a drop, and you're never teaching her. We're like, that's not what you want right now. And they're like, it's interesting because they're like, well, we'll trust you when you get to be 16, but for now, So I was like, it's interesting. We just pulled the plug on it because I'm like, honestly, I know it's important, but it's in addition to what we do, and something like this is going to take so much education because the culture of pitching and in our game, we have told people that the skill is identical at 8, 10, and 18 and 22. And it is not remotely the same skill. It doesn't even become that skill as we know until probably the earliest is probably 14. Mm-hmm. And so you just want to be prepping underneath for the actual skill later down the line. But no one knows that. And so the amount of education it would take is extensive. And we were just like, we can't be who we are and be that. But it's interesting. It's not hard. It's not hard to write. And you're like, oh, we could never come up with the program to teach someone pitching. Like, yes, we can. I have some of my former college teammates call me all the time. I've got a daughter. She's 8. She wants to learn how to pitch. What the hell do I do? I'm like, oh, let me just send you this real quick. And then it's like, do that. And they're like, oh, because they're doing it with them. They're like, oh, this is excellent. Like, yeah, that part's not hard, but it's the fight against all the other stuff.
Your mention of age 14, I think a major talking point in this conversation is the puberty transition. Right. And I think it's difficult at 12U and 14U because of the span of ages that could happen for each kid. But honestly, one of the reasons that I am a huge advocate for pitch counts, particularly at 10U and 12U, is exactly what we've talked about. It's not quite a workload conversation, it's future workload, but it at least diversifies who can pitch, because the skills of striking a ball with an object and throwing overhand are fundamental skills that kids should and can learn on their own. Now, is it good? That's not the conversation. But at even a non-baseball or softball player at some point will know how to throw a ball overhand, I hope, right? And those are fundamental skills. Softball pitching is not. It is not a skill that you just your body could potentially figure it out. And so the pitch counts at the younger ages, in my opinion, are just exposing, athletes to a complicated skill, but in a nice controlled environment. You're diversifying who can figure it out. And I think one of the most important points of education is the puberty transition. We also lose kids in this washout of, we hear it all the time, I'm 11 years old and all of a sudden, I can't hit the broadside of the barn. And then you ask, have you had a growth spurt? And they're like, oh yeah, she shot up 8 inches in the last 6 months. And I'm like, in what world could you expect a young athlete growing at that rate to be able to do the same thing over and over again? So we talk about pitching as a post-puberty concept, which is why that age of 14 is about when it starts to be something that you can influence, manipulate, train. But pre-puberty, and I even think in this, if you are a quote unquote early bloomer, 10, 11 years old, you still need to take a pre-puberty approach to pitching, because that's what's going to preserve you for the long run. And so we have to monitor that. We have to have education around it. We have to have coaches who recognize it, parents who recognize that talking about their kid going through a growth spurt and getting to their first period is a huge deal, not just developmentally, but biologically, biomechanically, and pitchers take the brunt of it because the motion's so complicated. It is the most, and when I talk to a parent and I say, hey, this is what she's got going on, and it's not always a dad, sometimes it is a mom, and they're like, oh yeah, that makes tons of sense. Right? They just don't think of that. We just think of this natural biological process, but it really jacks kids up.
For sure. And there's it's there for a lot of reasons, Laura, which we talk about. It's one, the hips expand, which make rotating more difficult. We're airborne when we rotate. When we have to rotate, we got to go one direction and then back in the other direction quickly. The levers are growing, but also chest size. I have watched multiple athletes. I think we wildly underestimate this game. It's a dream of mine someday for us to get into the sports bra business and to collaborate. I'm not kidding, because I'm it is so misunderstood. The way that chest size, it's not just impacts deceleration, but in pitching, because we have to rotate aggressively in one direction, stop, and then aggressively while in the air, go in the other direction. The difficulty that we see in pitchers who have larger chests, the ability to do that, and that sports bras, as we always talk about, are designed to keep their chests in check from an up-down jumping standpoint, but not necessarily side to side. And the nature of changing direction is wild. And pitchers don't do it well. And all the time when we're studying biomechanics of athletes who are older and they're built in a way, and this is just their biology, it's their genetic makeup, right? And we're seeing okay, now all of a sudden rotation is just a disaster and the control of it is a disaster. Who even knows? We've given recommendations to our athletes, you absolutely need a better sports bra. Who even knows if there's actually one out there on the market that's good enough, right? But then we have seen many of times that pitchers have legitimately just stopped. They've become terrible during puberty because basically their most significant body change is their chest size, and they're trying to navigate it and what that does to their arm path. Their anterior core is a mess. And when they're up in the air, when they're overhead, I should say, then all of a sudden their arm paths, a huge thing that we see with athletes when they're a major change that happens for them in that growth spurt is like a substantial change in their chest size. The arm path issue because of the anterior core, it is a mess. And so in reality, athletes, young athletes who, you know, like who are doing something, who are going through changes where that's likely to derail them because how significant those changes are more likely to have success later in pitching if they just waited. They just waited and stabilized and learned their bodies and then were stable and had a stronger anterior core. Basically, the change stopped, like slowed down, and then they worked on the skill. They didn't have a shot, but they get derailed because of that, because that transition is so difficult. And there's just, obviously, we know there is no research out there about the like change in chest size and its relationship to pitching. We hardly had any research on pitching. We don't even have a return to throw program, right? Before we wrote one. So I think like we know that this is the future, but it's a huge problem. And I don't think enough people pay attention to it generally, because of course you're going to see athletes out there who are grown and have different shapes and sizes, but it's that change during puberty that just is a nightmare. And it's definitely enough to just completely derail someone and they never pitch again.
Well, or you get the other extreme of it, which we see a ton too, which is like, they didn't have that much change during puberty. And actually now they're just throwing 58. They threw 58 before, and now they throw 58 still. And it's really hard to overcome because they didn't get the benefits of not necessarily chest size, but a bunch of height that came from puberty. Some, you know, they aren't that. They were 5'4" before puberty and they're 5'4" now, and they throw 58 and they threw 58 after. And they're like, I was getting so much better and now I'm not. And so I was actually thinking when you were like, the athletic kids are probably the ones who still will be good. I'm like, no, that's actually not. I mean, that probably disagree with. There are, what we see is like, there might be the standout kids, of course, who are just, there's that top kid that just like was good forever. But what we know is like Kat Osterman didn't get good till 12, 13. She talks about it. That build of the lanky kid who, like, and there's, if they can be in the right setting, they have such amazing potential when they can start to understand their limbs and fill into it. But a lot of times those kids don't make it because our system is not designed for that patience. And I think pitch counts are all about, it is so interesting. It's like, yes, they're about workload, but workload becomes less relevant. You're not going to ride a kid that's getting hit if you have other options.
That's
like,
right.
So
right.
I think workload at the older ages becomes less relevant. Like I don't want to say never, because you definitely do still see this, but at the, like I look at the top 10 travel ball, 18U teams right now, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to go to the field and see the same kid throw every inning. They have the benefit of having grabbed the top 5 to 7 pitchers, and they have decent staffs. Now they might get to a point at the end of the year where you're like, this is pushing it. Like, okay, now we have this one kid who just is above those other kids and we're riding her a lot. And there are plenty of instances where people make poor judgments and just ride one kid. So I'm not saying that, but it happens less and less actually at the top age or at the top level of the teams that get the benefit of pulling many pitchers. You see it much more at this like tiers under that, where I have one kid, because the funnel starts to get narrower and narrower of options of pitchers when I'm at the 18U level. And so the only way that team that's making the decision throw this one good kid that stands out because that's all they have access to probably doesn't make that decision actually if they just have more pitchers. So right. I think if the target at the younger ages becomes much more around, like maybe we don't need to do pitch counts across the board. We can just watch how it goes. I think parents are starting to get educated enough that like, I don't want my kid going to the next level hurt, or I'm going into recruiting summer and I pitched so much in high school. Now I'm throwing low velo and I'm not getting looked at. Like, I think people are starting to see what's happening as a result of those things, but coaches don't have options. And so the focus has to be on this lower level of how do we get more pitchers to go up? And it does have to be this really targeted effort. It is going to have to be a big thing that we all sit together and talk about it, because it's just not as simple of like, just throw more pitchers, because that doesn't work.
No, they don't exist.
They don't exist. They don't know how to throw. They don't.
I think for parents who might be listening to this too, the predictor for future success is whether or not you can get out of puberty and maintain movement variability, which we've had topics on, right? Which whether or not you have movement variability, meaning you're not just stuck in one way of doing things. And if you produce power, right? I mean, that's athleticism. Athleticism is that you can produce power. If you're slow as hell, you can be strong as hell and slow as hell. Let's be clear. And we've got athletes like that. And they're like, I don't throw hard. Why? I'm so strong. Like, yes, because we've established you are strong as hell and slow as hell. Now, doesn't mean there's not space out there for pitchers who are throwing off speed. So it's like, lean in, Sally, because that's what you are, you know? But the reality is athleticism is about this combination of movement variability and the ability to produce power. It is not about the skill of pitching. Like going to a pitching coach who's teaching you the mechanics of pitching when you were young is ridiculous. Like you are more likely, if you just generally understand the skill, can step in, can do it, it's more relaxed, and you are focused more on like, I would like my kid to be a pitcher, keep her an athlete. It's like, keep her an athlete and just make sure she knows the skill. That's what we're talking about. She knows how to do it. If you asked her to go in and throw to 2 batters, 3 batters, she could do it. She's been taught it. She knows how to do it. Are the pitches breaking? Are they changing speed? No, and no one cares. That's all a chapter of a different time. It's just keep her an athlete and really monitor. Like, does your kid produce any power? And if she doesn't, as we've been able to see, then you still could be a good pitcher, but you've got to be able to, obviously you're going to lean into a little bit more of like this all speed track. But I think it's just for parents who have this dream of their kid being a pitcher, then they think that like the sooner they started and the more that she's good early, it's just not right. It's just not right.
What I would add to that, Ash, besides like, your movement variability, your movement quality and power is like your health. I mean, it's almost a tale as old as time at this point where, if I talk to, and it's particularly pitchers, where I talk to, a pitcher family, whatever, where she's had back pain, a stress fracture, scapular dyskinesis, bicep pain, and she's barely out of puberty. Like that's the stress fracture concept, especially on the landing leg, is absolutely a combination of rapid growth and way too much workload and the body being unable to keep up with that. Other challenges around the arm are simply an inefficiencies of trunk stability. And it's like we have to be, I think, as any parent listening, if your kid is having pain and they haven't reached puberty or they're just on the other side of puberty, that's a warning sign. There's a warning sign there that your body's telling you this motion right now is too hard for me. It doesn't mean it's going to be hard for me forever. I'm going to be in pain forever, but you got to put the brakes on for a second, right? And I think that there is this really sort of insidious nature of back pain and, this normalization of arm soreness that we pay attention to it more when, the athlete is older. We're like, oh, that's going to impact your ability to throw on Saturday. But we're like, the 12U kid, like, you're fine. Just do some PT. Yeah. It's like, no.
Well, it's great.
She probably doesn't even tell anyone.
Right. Well, and it's so interesting because when my sons say, like, my arm hurts from, 3 weeks ago, and it's longer, I don't know, doesn't matter. A month or 2 ago, my sons went with their dad on a bike ride. It was like 8 miles. They just like went on a bike ride. The next day, my youngest son had like really bad neck pain and like literally like couldn't move his neck, as you get sometimes as like an older person. I was so like alarmed by it because I kept saying, and Laura, I like asked you like, this doesn't seem normal. This is a 7-year-old. Like, what's happening? So I was like so freaked out by it. Now it went away after like 2 days and it was fine. But I think that level of like alarmist nature in 7 to 12-year-olds is appropriate. You are not supposed to have a young athlete come. It's fine if they're a little whatever, like I just did something a little more than I'm used to, or that was just like literally we remembered that he was carrying like a Camelback, like light backpack. And it just was like too much, but it was too much. Like that's the point, right? It was like that actually was too much. They are not producing enough force or doing enough sort of like, that's it.
They're not many adults.
Force. Right. They're not producing enough force that soreness and recovery in that way should be something that we need to take into consideration. They just shouldn't be doing it at that volume. No. The reason they are sore at that level is because they cannot rotate. And so the breakdowns they are having are scary. Right. I think that's
or
the
put
point.
the brakes on. They can't
Yes.
decelerate. They can't put the brakes on. So where they try to dissipate energy at the end of the motion, it's in their neck, it's in their shoulder. It's
Right.
the,
They have knee pain. They start having lower back pain.
Yeah.
It's like, these are not
You know who
normal
pitching
things.
was made for at 12 years old? Someone of my stature. Literally
Right.
someone who is small, who is, who's just like the athletes who are tall and lean, they don't have the anterior core. These are the lumbar stress fractures we see at 13 years old because they don't have the anterior core. And then the athletes who end up being larger, and because of that change in chest size, and it's too dramatic at that time, it's the same thing. Now their arm pat gets funky and all of that. So it's like the two categories who are most likely to have the builds to be great in the long run are the ones that are more likely to struggle when they are young until that time is over. You take someone who's small in stature, is just like really average type body type. This is what Krista's saying. Man, we are the state champions at 12U. Like basically that pitcher, because they're coordinated, they feel where their body is in space. Nothing changes that drastically for them. Like there's a high level of athleticism and proprioception. Great. But then you still probably like you throw within 4 miles per hour of when you were 12 to when you're 20, right? Like it's pretty much the same. So that's what I'm talking about. It's like that's the world that we're in, rather than having some patience and some recognition for like actually the athletes we just described are the ones that are more likely to produce later on. So if we had a freaking system to let them all do it, you would give them more of an opportunity to be like, nope, take a little time off. You still know how to pitch. We're still practicing it, but you don't need to be in the games as much because those other athletes are,
I just think I think that this has to be, as we are trying to grow the game and we're having conversations and we have Athletes Unlimited and AUSL growth, and we have the, conversations around Alliance and PGF and USSSA and USA softball as the Olympics, we're back in the Olympics. And there are all these governing bodies and invested interest who should to me, there is not, yes, get the games on ESPN. Yes, sell out the stadiums at the professional level. That's the business's job to keep trying to push. And right under that should be an urgency of how do we start having the right conversation about growing pitchers at the young ages? Because this is unique to our sport. It is super complex for all the reasons we said. People don't know how to teach it. There aren't resources around the young ages that are appropriate, that aren't just this like, yeah, I'll give you a resource. Come pay me to do a 30-minute lesson with your kid over and over. There aren't team-based resources, because that's really that's what I was saying to you earlier. Like, people would have been fine with our plyo program for the younger ages if it was implemented in a team setting. And like, okay, maybe they still do go on Tuesdays to their lesson if they really feel like they need that or they want the extra resource. But
you're like, newsflash, take that money, roll down your window, let that shit out of the window, and then roll it back up. Literally, how does that feel? Yeah.
But at least then they have this base in the team setting of getting sort of reps, and everyone gets an opportunity, even if you maybe don't want to go pay for lessons or whatever it looks like. And so this to me is like one of the most urgent conversations in our game, because when you talk about why teams might be dwindling at younger ages and why there aren't enough, and we have like slight uptick in participation again coming out of COVID, but like it's not as rapid of growth at the youth level for what our game is growing at the top. Like we're not keeping up with that pace at the youth level because it's hard to put teams together when you don't have enough pitchers. It is all centered on the pitchers. Like it has to be, obviously. If you do not have pitchers, you cannot play the game. And it is not simple enough that you just go pick up random people who pitch. They don't exist. So when you're talking about being able to grow our game, growing the number of pitchers and the way we develop pitchers has to be at the very, very top. And every interested party should want to be in that room, having a conversation, should be collaborating, because it's not going to get done if we don't. This isn't as simple as slapping, for all the things you talked about. It's not as simple as slapping pitch counts on. It's not as simple as having workload conversations at the older ages or at the collegiate level. It's not as simple as, it's not even as simple as saying like, hey, we just need to develop more pitchers. And even if everyone was like, great, I am on board, and every single 10 and 12U coach across the country was like, got it, we're on board. As we already said, then you have a bunch of dads who don't even know how to do that motion. They've never done that motion in their life. I can't really even just like easily just toss underhands. So it's like we haven't built this setup for teaching that in a way that makes sense, or having structure that teaches that in a way that makes sense. And so, we have to start, okay, what's the first step? What's the next step going to be? And it's going to require collaboration. And I can't imagine why people wouldn't want to be in that room. We have to know this is an issue. Like we absolutely have to know this is an issue. The collegiate coaches know it's an issue. I would imagine you're seeing at the professional level that it's starting to be an issue of who's available in that pool. The professional game is going to keep growing and growing. So we're going to want to expand how many pitchers we have in that. We want top pitchers to stay healthy that long. Like, it all starts with how many people are playing at the younger ages. So to me, the conversation is really about, we don't have the exact answers, but it's about developing more pitchers. It's about protecting workload, putting parameters in place so that people are incentivized and aligned for more pitchers and not riding their best kids. And the only way you're going to even begin that conversation is to get the right people in the room, and everyone's around this idea of growth and collaboration. And so I think like that has to happen. It's just like, I don't even, there's a lot of things we could talk about. There's the NCAA rule. Everyone's
all right. So here we go back in the youth space. Krista says it has to happen. Damn it. Okay. Yeah. Just sign me up for some shit I don't even know about probably.
Yeah. But anyway, so if anyone's listening to this that's in any of those organizations or has contacts in that, tell them to come to Pitch Talk. We can get a room together and we can all start talking about it, because it's a great space.
That's true. Maybe that would be a good spin-off conversation, not a main talk, but we talked about like having these spin-off for people that are in person, especially. That would probably be a good one at the youth level and like some of the issues, because even though most of the coaches that go to Pitch Talk are collegiate level, the more like Trisha's always been great at this. She's always pushing that, like, wait, this is a problem. And like coaches have daughters, you know what I mean? So like they have invested interest personally also, not just related to their job. So I think that would be a good idea at Pitch Talk.
As a bit of a selfish plug, but I did a podcast with the NFCA back in February, beginning of the winter, with Joanna Lane, specifically about puberty. So listeners, if you don't already listen to the NFCA podcast, there's a plug there. But we had about an hour-long conversation about kind of this concept, but really related around puberty and some of the things that we're really missing in this coaching conversation.
All right. Well, anyone that wants to show up, you know my number, I'm sure. So text me and we'll talk about pitching and development.
Let's fill the room. Fill the room.
We need you to like and subscribe and review the podcast so that we can keep making it every week for you. And maybe even drop what topic you'd like us to talk about or rant about or whatever we do every week.